This is John Zentner Sr. out in front of our house at 110 East 22nd Street. What we're going to do here this morning is look around and see a lot of the little spots that we've had fun in for these 40 years since we moved in here. This is 1949, October of 1949. We moved in here in 1948. So we're going to move on now and see what it's all about in the old Zentner house at 110 East 22nd Street in Merced. Now we're going to walk down the arborway that we have leading to the house and see what's going on inside of the place. We've had a lot of fun in this house, walking up and down the arborway and playing a lot of things in the yard. And also, we've had a lot of music going around here. I think you can hear some of it in the background. We love that. It's part of our lives, games and music. We're inside the yard and we're looking at the front entranceway. Originally, the house was all redwood, but in late 1969 and in early 70s, we added a brick trim to the house in 3 or 4 places, and the main section of the brick trim is right here. You're looking at it, right in the front. We think it added a lot to that. At least it's given us a lot of pleasure looking at it. We're going to look around the yard and see a lot of things, including the swimming pool and the place where we play the games the way we play the golf games. We're looking down the front of the house, and we're going to look down the east side of the house, and you'll notice that there's various barbecue things there and various clubs and things of that sort that we play games with, and we're constantly playing games, so we don't hide them, we keep them out. Now, originally the home did not have a swimming pool, but we added it some 10 years after we moved in 1958. Judy in her diving and Jim in his swimming, we thought that they would like it and it might help them. As a matter of fact, we think because of this swimming pool, Judy won the county diving championship for children of children of under 10. And we've had a tremendous amount of fun in this pool, parties around it, games around it. It has just been a ball. We're so happy we put it in. Here's another view of the pool. This is looking at it from the south side of the house, the southeast side. Also here we have a lot of fruit trees. We have apple trees and apricot trees and a whole bunch of other stuff, and we do a lot of eating off our own fruit. It's fun. But this area has always been a place that's been occupied pretty heavily by kids playing games and socializing. It's just been great over on this side. Great on. Well, this is the back of the house, actually the south side of the house. We're now in the rear of the southwest side of the house. Now back here we used to have the swings and stuff for the kids. Those are gone now, but back here we play golf. We have for many, many years. Croquet, bocce, ring ball, many games are played back here, and you'll notice that there are tables back here. We sometimes have picnics all the way around the yard, and I do mean all the way around, 180 degrees around the house. But back here, every inch of this ground has been used in one way or another. And then up towards the front is where we had a special golf game, and we've played about 20,000 games of this golf up in the front of this house in the area that you're looking at now. Right in that area. At times there would be 50, 75 people there. We had big tournaments there. City tournaments have been held here in golf and in other games such as ring ball and croquet. This is the front of the house. This is where we play many of our games. This is where we sit around and have fun and listen to the kind of music that you're listening to now. Yes, it's been many years that we've been out here in this area, which is outside the house, but inside the fence. As you can see, we have golf holes out here. As a matter of fact, around the yard there are 25 golf holes, and we play a miniature type of putting thing. And in all of our games, we estimate that there are over 94,000 games in our record books that have been played right here in this yard, in this house, and in the garage, which we call the sports barn. Yes, we've had a lot of fun here, and we don't regret a minute of it. A lot of new people have come to know us, and we've come to know a lot of new people. Our kids grew up here. They enjoyed it. Our grandkids are still enjoying it. And God with us, we'll enjoy it for a long time. But we wanted you to know about it because it's very important that you know where you came from. And maybe you'll be coming back here for a long time. Heavens only knows what this place will be like 200 years or 300 years or 500 years from now. Maybe some of you will be seeing this that long in the distant future. Now what we're going to do is go into the house and talk more about the personal family home at 110 East 22nd Street in Merced, California, where we have lived for over 40 years. And I have lived for all 69 years of my life in Merced, less the few years that I was away in college and in the naval service during World War II. Now, a lot of you folks haven't even been born yet who will probably be looking at this over a period of years. Right at the present time, we have a President George Bush who's just got into office, and he seems to be doing a pretty good job. But you'll know more about that 50 or 100 years from now, or maybe even 200 years from now. I think maybe I should tell you a little something about our family. Well, it started, of course, whatever it was, thousands of years ago or millions of years ago, but more recently, we'll talk about those who came before me. My great-grandfather was named John Zentner. His wife, same as mine. His wife was a Catherine Zentner. They lived in Switzerland. As a matter of fact, in the New Glarus province there, or county, or whatever you'll call it, in a place called Ulm. And he was a professor of music at Bern University, as we understand it. And a sort of a natural musical tendency seems to run down through the family. Maybe it came from him, maybe just coincidence. When you're looking at this a number of years from now, you'll know more about inherited factors because our science is learning things every day. Many good things will happen to you in the way of science and medicine, and maybe you'll live to be 150 years old. Back to my family. John Zentner had a son named Ralph Zentner, and he was born in about 1846 in Switzerland. And it seems that this John Zentner and his wife Catherine broke up, and they sent a little boy, Ralph Zentner, which happens to be kind of a family name. It's my middle name. I'm John Ralph Zentner Sr. But anyway, they sent a little Ralphie Zentner, who was my grandfather-to-be, they sent him to Wisconsin to live with some relatives somewhere around Milwaukee in that general area. We don't know for sure what town that was, but anyway, he grew up rather rapidly, and came the Civil War, and he was just a young kid, 16, 17 years of age, and General Grant was around looking for soldiers for the Union cause so that he could get back and get his commission into the service and a bunch of nice things, and young Ralph Zentner signed up to be in his army. Well, he fought in every major battle of the Civil War, and won a thing called the Iron Brigade, which I happen to have at the present time. And after the war, he settled in Wisconsin, in a place called Wisconsin Dells, and he started his family, and he had 5 sons. The oldest was Wilford, and then there was a John, whose name was John Scott, named after one of our ancestors. And then there was Samuel Wentworth Zentner, who was my dad. There was a Francis Zentner and an Albert Zentner. But Samuel Wentworth Zentner, Sr., was quite an adventurer, a traveler. He was very versatile, and he liked many things, all the way from sports. didn't particularly care for music, and that's something that I had always wished that I had gone into, and many of the other members of this family have been interested in music, have done music because of our great grandfather John Zentner, who we just discussed. But Sam Zentner was into many things. He was a traveler. He was a rancher. He was a miner. He was very interested in sports. He played a lot of baseball, suffered some injuries playing sports, which may have affected his life later on. He did many things, and he drifted all over the country. He sailed down river boats. He managed fighters. He managed a great colored heavyweight in Sammy Langford, who chased champion Jack Johnson all over the world virtually. But Sam Zentner was here and there. He was in Idaho. He was in Montana. He was a union organizer. He was very liberal. He was very pro-poor people. And we all should be that way. There are way too many people today who don't care about the unprivileged. And what we have today is, we call them the homeless. Anyway, Sam Zentner ultimately got to California. And he settled down, more or less, in a little community just south of Merced called LeGrand, actually Minturn, which was kind of part of LeGrand, which was near Chowchilla. And he went into ranching or farming, whatever you prefer to call it, a very small place, and he sold real estate. He got into real estate. Well, he did very well in real estate, so much so that he owned what he thought was a pretty good car. And in 1915, he went to San Francisco, and his Hudson broke down, and more or less accidentally he stumbled into a Chevrolet place. He couldn't even pronounce Chevrolet, but he went into this place and he says, "Hey, what do you give me on that old Hudson out in the street? What kind of a trade-in will you give me?" A word that's so familiar to all of us who've spent a lot of time in the car business. What do you give me? But anyway, he made a deal with this guy on a Chevrolet, and he went out to get a bite to eat. When he came back, the guy says, "Hey, why don't you buy a couple of these, Zentner, take them down there to the San Joaquin Valley in Merced, where you live." And meantime, Dad had moved to Merced and bought a little ranch on Girard Avenue right out of town. He's take them down there and sell them and pick yourself up a profit. Dad said, "Oh, you can't make any money selling these doggone things." But he bought a couple of them, took them down and sold them. Make a long story short, he got into the car business very quickly. In 1915, he became a Chevrolet dealer. He went to Detroit and he got the franchise. In 1915, he decided that those dealers up there were making money on him, so he went back to Detroit and he became the Chevrolet dealer in Merced, California. And that's what he was for the rest of his life, a automobile dealer. Although in 1934, he changed to Chrysler Plymouth and ultimately Nash, International Trucks, White Trucks, and a car called Crosley. So that was more or less his career, and he was, I think the most important thing is how active he was in the affairs of this city of Merced. He gave property for the fairgrounds, he built ballparks, he did many things. He was truly a great man in the field of helping people to enjoy sports. And not only that, contributed to everything else. He was a magnificent citizen. Now, about my mother, Florence Zentner. She was also from Wisconsin, but met my dad in 1915 at the San Francisco Exposition, and they were married in 1919, and I came along in 1920.
How much can you remember about her?
Well, her story was more or less like this. Her mother was named Ellen Kramer, after whom my sister Ellen, my late sister Ellen, was named. And Ellen Kramer married a fellow by the name of John Williams, who was a sea captain. His real name was John Lundstrom, or rather William Lundstrom, and his folks died. He was from up in Sweden. He was adopted by his aunt and uncle, who were lived in Wales, and so they would say he was Welsh, but really he was a Norwegian or rather Swedish descent. So he took the name John Williams, but he was gone much of the time. My mother had 2 sisters and 3 brothers, all who were very good people, very active. They were very devout Catholics, and of course we were raised at that. I was raised as a Catholic, and at one time considered studying to be a priest. Anyway, my mother was extremely active in church work, and she was probably the most generous person, along with my dad, to poor people. She used to actually drive down in the so-called slum area of this town and give the people not only clothes but money, food, and all the rest of it. And she founded the Seroptimus Club, Business and Professional Club for Women, and did many, many things. And when my dad passed away, she took over and ran the automobile business. Unfortunately, she passed away in 1960, 10 years after my dad. They were both 68 years of age when they passed away.
Now, when did you say they met in San Francisco?
They met at the San Francisco Exposition in 1915. And they corresponded, and my dad drove back and forth to Wisconsin, went back.
She was just in San Francisco for the exhibition?
She was there for the exhibition with her mother and her two sisters. They came.
They were just there visiting, and they went back to Wisconsin.
They went back to Wisconsin, and he corresponded with them. He took the train back and forth 4 or 5 times, and finally, some 4 years after they met, they decided to be married. It was that way in those days. You knew somebody for 2 or 5 or 10 years.
How old were they when they got married?
Well, my dad was about 38 years old, and my mother was about 28 years of age. And I came along a year after they were married, my sister 3 years after that, and my brother is 9.5 years younger than I am. So they had my brother.
Did they move directly to Merced? He was in business then?
He was in business in Merced. Yes, we lived on a ranch out on Girard Avenue. And I think the first things that I can remember is playing in that yard and with the chickens and stuff. My dad always liked farming, and he had 50 acres of figs and almonds there. And I can remember going out when we would shake the almonds out of the trees and playing with the chickens and the pigs and the goats and stuff my first 4 years were raised on a farm, and I have a lot of pictures showing that.
You have a much younger brother, is that right?
Yes, he's nearly 10 years, about 9.5 years younger. And
you were the oldest, and then came?
My sister Ellen was 3 years younger than I was.
Okay, and then there were 3 of you.
There were 3 of us. And about 1924, or early 25, I don't remember exactly when, my dad built a lovely 2-story house at 921 West 22nd Street. The same street.
Maybe we'll take a picture of that later.
We'll have to take a picture of that. That's the same street that I live on. So from the time I was 4 years of age, I've lived on this street. And when the war was over and I came back, we moved into a house 2 doors away from my folks at 935 West 22nd. I now live at 110 East 22nd. So for 65 years, I've lived on this same street. But anyway, what happened along the line with my dad and mom was generally good. My sister married a fellow who fellow who just got out of the service from Castle Air Force Base, which was Merced Army Air Force Base at the time. He wasn't out; he was still in when she married him, and they had two boys. Richard, who unfortunately passed away a few years because of an industrial accident, and his older brother Bobby, who is a scientist, holds a doctor's degree in biochemistry, and I should say a daughter, Linny, who lives in Salinas, and she's very happily married. My brother-in-law, Henry Cavanola, married several years after my sister died. My brother Sam married early, and his first child died, and he had 9 more children, and 9 of them are still alive. He lives in Fresno. He's been a highly successful public relations man. He's a campaign manager for Congressman of Fresno, has been for years, and Brother Sam is coming up on 60 and thinking of retiring, and 3 of his sons have moved back to Fresno, as well as 2 of his daughters. He too is interested in sports like we were. Now, as far as my career is concerned, I went to my first grade, I went to a public school, and then the next 6 years I went to Our Lady of Mercy Catholic School in Merced, which I was fortunate enough to graduate doing the 7th and the 8th grade in 1 year. And then in 1933, I went to St. Joseph's Military Academy at Belmont. St. Joseph's was an outstanding school as far as the scholastic end of it is concerned, and as far as military training is concerned. It helped me later on when I was in the service. After 2 years there, they only had 2 years of high school, I came back to Merced High School. And I was not going to go out for sports, but...
Now, how is it that you happen to go to a military school rather than going to a public school?
Well, first of all, Dad was sick at that time. He had an unfortunate attack of arthritis, and Mother wanted me to go there because she'd heard how good it was as far as sports is concerned.
What grades were those?
That was the 9th and 10th grade. They went for the 1st through the 10th. But
in other words, you weren't a disciplinary problem. They
no.
The military.
I went down there, and not to brag or anything, I was very, very fortunate. I made a very high rank in 2 years from the school, and it was a kind of a keystone to my whole life because I learned discipline and I learned the importance of following orders. And grandchildren and great-grandchildren, you have to do that. You can't be a rebel or a renegade, I don't think. Sometimes you have to speak up for your rights, but you have to conform pretty much, and that's what I did, and that's the reason that things worked out. When I came back to Merced High after that, I was not going to go out for sports, but I was sitting out in the stands watching practice one day, and Coach Billy George, a key person in my life, ran into the stands. I thought he was just running across the field. He says, "Your name's John Zentner, isn't it?" I said, "As you talk real fast." He said, "Why aren't you out for football?" I said, "Because I don't want to go." He said, "We'll see to that." He grabbed me, dragged me into the gym, called my mother. He said, "Florence," my mother's name. He said, "Why isn't John out for football?" She says, "Tell him to go out for football." Well, he dragged me down, he dressed me in a suit, and that changed my whole life. It changed my whole life. Just like some of this music that I'm listening to is changing my life. It changed my whole life. I went out for sports, and before I was through, I was in all 4 sports there, and many nice things came my way. And I went to University of California and played some football there and was doing pretty fair. And the war came along and dragged us away. After the war,
let's talk about the war experiences a little bit. How old were you when that broke out?
Well, I was 21 years of age. What I did is I transferred from University of California to Northwestern University and got my commission. And when I came back, I was assigned back to Naval Intelligence, is what I did for a good part of the war. And
you were an officer, right?
Yes, I wound up as a lieutenant commander in the Navy. And when I came back to San Francisco, I looked up my old girlfriend, a little chick by the name of Joni Shire, who's your great-great-great-grandmother or whatever.
Well, where did you meet her?
Well, I met her at University of California before I went back to Northwestern.
I heard there's a pretty good story behind that, how you met.
Well, it's more or less the story. As a matter of fact, I say it's a story. She doesn't say it's a story. I was walking through the student union one time, which is called the Stevens Union, with a couple other football players with kind of a leather jacket on, and she came up to me and she says, "Hey, stupid, how would you like to join the Republican Party?" I said, "What? You call me?" She said, "Well, that's what I said." And the other guys looked at me and just said, "Let's get out of here." But she looked pretty cute, and she said, "Come on now, I'd like to have you join the Republican Party." So she said, "Let me buy a cup of coffee." Well, I suppose foolishly I did, and that's the reason I'm here with her as a wife some 50 years later, or whatever it is. But that's how we met. She's a very nice gal from a very, very fine family, and she'll tell you about that later on, from a old-line San Francisco family, successful business family.
You met her before the war started?
Oh, yes, I met her before the war started. And
did you go together for a while?
Oh, yes, we went together, and I was going with her when I had to go back to Northwestern. I couldn't take her back there. So
what year was that?
That was in 1941.
Right after the war broke out?
No, the war hadn't broken out yet. That was in the spring of 1941. I got my commission before the war started.
Where is Northwestern?
That's in Evanston. We were at the downtown campus at Chicago. Northwestern is a Big Ten school.
Okay.
And anyway, we were in Chicago. So anyway, I had a lot of duty overseas on ships.
Were you on ship most of the time? Or
I was on ships. I was on about 8 different ships as an intelligence officer for the Navy, doing what I did, and in the Atlantic, and the Pacific, and Africa, and the landings at the Philippine Islands and various other places, New Guinea, and gone quite a bit of the time. And in between, we had the 2 boys, John.
Well, in other words, you got back to the States then during...
Oh yeah, I got back to the States. I'd never be gone over 3 or 4 months, and then I would be assigned to the Port Director's Office in a naval intelligence capacity for a couple of months, and then
where would that be?
Well, I was both in New Orleans and in New York and in L.A. and in San Francisco. I was assistant.
New Orleans where you had your first son then, right?
That's where I had my first son. Yeah, would usually act as assistant port director, and would be working with merchant ships and Navy ships and Coast Guard ships. But it was a deal that got me home. I wasn't gone for 2 and 3 years like some of the fellows were, and there were some very risky moments which we survived, and I was much more fortunate than most of the guys. I mean, there were some that didn't go overseas and had no problems at all. A lot of them had some very fantastic problems. Well, anyway, with the war over, I was thinking of staying in, and would have, but I got a lot of pressure from my dad because of the business, and I was glad that I came back, and I took over the Nash deal and moved into a location at 1617 I Street. And some very good things happened there. I had some fine young men like Henry Greer and Mac McGarry and Shorty Zook and others that worked with me, and Manny Cordero, and I enjoyed every minute of being in the Nash business. But the time came for me to sell out a few years later, and I joined Jim Thompson in the Lincoln Mercury establishment. First, I just wanted to sell. I hated being a manager in the car business. I really did. I enjoyed selling, but I got back into it, and I was there from about 53 through 1960 with him. And when I took, in 1960, when Jim Thompson sold out and moved out of town, I took a job in Oakland as the general manager.
Excuse me, was that a pretty lucrative business then? Or
it was just so. It was never a real fat business, but I took a job with Hacker Motors on 2445 Broadway in Oakland as the general manager. But I had to commute back and forth on weekends. We couldn't sell our house, and it didn't work out for us financially.
Well, where were you living then?
I was living with Joan, my wife's aunt and uncle.
I mean, in Merced, were you still living?
Right here.
Oh, you're living in this house.
We lived right here. We never.
When did you build this house?
This house was built in 1948. So we've been here for over 40 years, 41 years. We've been.
So you lived in this house for a while, and then you tried to sell the house and move.
We never did. We just lived in it. We tried to sell it when I was working up. My wife and kids were still here. We didn't sell it, and so I came back and I opened up a used car lot in 1961 and 62. And then my good buddy Jack Roth was my closest buddy. Used to he'd take me out to lunch and say, "I have some bad news for you." He took me out to lunch one day and he said, "I have some terror." He was my teammate in high school, and we played semi-pro ball together and baseball and football and everything. And he said, "I got some very bad news for you." He said, "Your uncle, Frank Zentner," my uncle, my dad's brother, Francis Zentner, Frank Zentner, was the used car manager at John Ross Chevrolet, and he was about 85 years of age and retiring. Jack Ross said, "I got some bad news for you. You've got to close your lot and come over and go to work for me as a manager on that lot." So that is bad news. He said, "Let's have a drink on it." Well, he talked me into it, but I only wanted to come over there as a salesman. But he only let me be a salesman for about a week, and then I was the manager for
the used car lot that I know.
The used car lot, I was there from 62 to 1977, when I went into the insurance business. My son John Jr. in the meantime had played good football. John Jr. played freshman football at the University of California. He played junior college football at Modesto Junior College. And he played good football at Fresno State. And after that, he got married, and he was selling cars. But he came down here one day and said, "Dad, I'd like to go to work for Farmers Insurance." Well, I knew some people out there, and I was able to get him on. He was a howling success as a company man. But then he decided to be an agent. And when he told me he wanted to be an agent and work on commission, I almost died at that time. I wouldn't have been here. I almost had a heart attack. I said, "Oh, I can't believe that you want to give up that good job. You're on the way to the top." Well, he said, "I don't have to quit my job at Farmers as an underwriter, as a senior underwriter. And I can sell out of my house." Well, I said, "Do it for a little while." Well, make a long story short, he was a fantastic success, #1 in the country. And then one day, Farmers Insurance walked in and told him, "You're fired as an agent, John." He said, "Fine, I want to go back to cars. I'm glad that you fired me." "No, you don't understand. Now you're district manager down in Los Angeles." Well, I said that rather facetiously, but that's the way they kind of kid with you when they promote you.
Well, before we get too far, let's digress and introduce your kids.
Okay, let's take a look at some of them here.
Number one child. Here's a picture that they have on his mantle. That's John as a, where was he playing then?
He was playing at Fresno State. He was playing tackle at Fresno State.
And Jim?
Jim is at San Francisco State. He played football there and also baseball. That's when he played baseball there. And he played good in both, just like John did. And John was also on the wrestling team at Modesto Junior College and also on the wrestling team at Fresno State. Varsity wrestling team.
I think you've even got a picture of Judy there.
There's a picture of Judy. Judy was a yell leader and a peppy one. Did a great job of keeping things rolling out there. She did an awful lot to help the Merced High teams by her spirit, unabated spirit. She was a mover. Right. An extremely talented actress. I still think that the day may come where Jackie will move into some sort of movie or TV circles. Jackie, a very talented model. When she was in Merced High, she appeared in a number of plays as the lead, including The Miracle Worker. And every now and then I run into somebody who went to school with Jackie, and they say, hey, she was the greatest actress that ever came out of her. Now she, of course, is married with the family, and she's getting up 35, 36, 37, and who knows what's going to happen. But there is a gal that they'll remember for a long time at Merced High for her acting ability. Now, what's happened here in recent years? Well, we mentioned about John Jr., how he went in as a district manager down in the LA area, and he's been right up on the top for years. We're very, very proud of him. Also, he's worked with us on inventing some of these games, and hopefully by the time you see this, who knows how big those games will be. That's up to fate.
You didn't talk about inventing games. When did all this games business
start?
Well,
this all started, I have worked in games all of my life.
How do you mean worked in games?
Well, I've invented games. I've played games. Games that you don't see on the market. Games that aren't in the national press. I mean, we've, for example, since 1965, every game that I've invented and that I have been around and witnessed has been recorded. And we have something like...
Show us some of those recording your books there that you've got all your records.
Well, we have these record books.
Is that your record book right there?
Yeah, I'll get that out in a little while.
Okay.
We've recorded every game since 1965, so that at the present time there's around 96,000 games in our record book.
Okay.
And several thousand people have played it. Well, John Jr. worked with me on that, and like I say, we're hopeful that good things would come out of it.
Well, I know that we used to play golf in the front yard a lot.
We have like a little golf course, 25 holes of golf around this yard of ours, and we have probably 30 different games that we play in the yard of golf alone.
We just played with putters and...
With putters, it's basically a putting game. And in the garage, we have that pool table that was made in 1898. It's been recovered 3 or 4 times. Matter of fact, Lauren standing here recovered it one time for us, and one of his sons, David, invented a series of games that we play just all the time. It's called the David series. It's a entirely different sort of thing. You don't use the pockets on the pool table. I won't get into any great details. Just by the time you see this, who knows? It might be a household word.
There was another great game that we used to play that you started with radiator hose. Why don't you tell that story?
Radiator hose, a game called ring ball. Yeah, we used to...
at the time we called it something else, though.
At the time we called it quoits. So we make these rings and you throw them in the yard to balls. It's similar to bocce, only it's flying bocce. Instead of rolling the balls, we throw the rings. And that game is now called ring ball and is on the national market right now in September of 1989. And it's spreading very, very, very fast. And we have other games like Obies and Tweeners and Totem, and I could go on. I've invented something over 300 games. But anyway, that's enough of that. About Jim, Jim went into the service and served in the Vietnam War in the Air Force and came out with the rank of captain. And he worked with the probation department for a while in Stanislaus County. And then he went into insurance, and he became the national champ with Paul Revere. And ultimately, he wound up with Farmers when John Jr. Left to go with Farmers Insurance as a district manager in LA. And that's when I left Ross Chevrolet and the car business to go into insurance. So I was in insurance for about 10 years, and then they came in one day, well, not 10 years from the time I was in, but about 4 years after Jim was in. He had won national awards with Farmers Insurance. And they walked in one day and fired him as an agent and said, "You're not an agent anymore." And he says, "Good, I'll do something else." He says, "No, now you're the district manager up in the Bay Area." So we kid about that, but he went on, and his district, which includes about 40 agents, has won numerous awards. In the meantime, he went back to law school and he got his law degree. So he has his JD, and if he wanted to go into law, he could do that too. But right at the moment, he's pretty well absorbed in the insurance business. Daughter Judy has been an extremely successful mother. She married Captain Lauren Bortnam of the Air Force, who, when his time was up, got out of the service and went to work for Delta Airlines. And currently, in 1989, he is a captain of a United Airliner. His two sons, my grandsons, Richard Bortnam and David Bortnam, are highly successful.
I hear you say that.
We just laughed about it. Lauren is a captain with Delta Airlines.
Right.
Delta, heaven forbid, not United. Lauren Bortnam is a captain with Delta Airlines. His two sons are David and Ricky, and they both played great high school ball. Unfortunately, David was a serious leg injury and was not able to participate in college football. Ricky went on and plays with Southwest Baptist University, and this is in his second year, and he's been an outstanding quarterback there. He broke school records and made a lot of honors, and he's still got a couple more years after this year. Judy has been an enormous influence. She is a businesswoman, and she's helped that family in so many ways, not to mention how much she's helped the rest of the family, not to mention how much she's helped her mother, Joan Zentner, my wife, how much she's helped us. We have been unfortunate in these later years to have had leg problems and back problems, which has considerably impeded us, but we still have our chins up, mainly because of Judy Zentner Bortnam's influence. Not only has she helped us, but she's helped her sister. When her sister had some illnesses and adversities, her sister Jackie lives down in Fort Worth, only a few miles from where the Bortnams lives in Denton, Texas. Both towns very close to Dallas. So we're very proud of our 4 children. I'm proud of what my brother Sam has done. I'm very proud of what my mother and father has done.
Well, now Jackie's still in Fort Worth, right?
Jackie is in Fort Worth, and currently her husband, Keith Thomas, is breaking in with John Jr. in Farmers Insurance in the Los Angeles area, more specifically in the Lancaster area, which is just north of Los Angeles. And if everything works out like we anticipate, that is the Thomases, Keith Thomas and Jackie Thomas, and their children will move there. Jackie has actually 4 children: JJ, John, Tasha, and Kirk. She has 4 children.
And 2 children by her husband has 2 children also, but they don't live with him.
Keith Thomas has 2 children, but they don't.
They still live in Miami, and JJ lives with Jackie, and John lives with his father, John, in, where is he, up in Ohio now, I believe.
Jackie had a divorce, was married to Danielsbeck, and is now married to Thomas, and it all seems to be working out. Jim, who lives in Danville, the very lovely home, has one daughter, Kristen, who is now going on about 11, a sweet, darling, little, thoughtful girl. John Jr. has Johnny III, who starred at Stanford in football for 4 years, played over there 5 years, a redshirt year, and graduated with honors from Stanford, and is currently working with his dad in the insurance business. He's got 7 or 8 pro teams that are interested in him. He's a big fellow, around 6'6", 288, but he's had some leg problems, and his future depends on that. His brother Jeffy, they stayed a couple of years and is now playing.
Just a second. I'm going to introduce these. I've got a picture of John III up there, If you'll shut the camera off just a second, I'll move that picture of Jeff so that we can see him too. Jeff here now, you're right.
Okay, we're looking at Jeffy, and Jeffy played over at San Jose State, and he's transferred to LA Valley, I think because of some of the courses, and he wanted to be closer to home, and he's playing real good ball, although LA Valley is losing. Jeffy is coming along nicely, and he may transfer to some place like USC or UCLA or Fullerton State or Long Beach State.
I'm going to shift over here. Here's a picture of Rick.
Here's a picture of
in high school
of Ricky when he made all-star teams at Denton High School down in Texas, and he went on and he's playing with Southwest Baptist University and getting excellent grades too. I might add that that's so very important. Even though great-grandchildren, you're in sports and doing real good, those grades are more critical, more important than anything. You just have to have knowledge out there in this world. Learn other languages. Perhaps learning Spanish is a good thing here if you're going to be in California, or maybe Russian because it's such a power, or French. Learn something besides your own language. Learn your own language. Learn how to write it, how to speak it, to get the proper inflections.
Not to digress, but here's a picture, another one of your grandkids. This is number 87.
Oh, here is David.
That's his senior year, I believe.
David Bortnam in his senior year at Denton High was a terrific star down there. Just was one of the finest all-around players I ever had, and regrettably suffered a very, very serious leg injury, which kept him in a cast for over a year, and the doctors would not let him play anymore, and just as well. If you have a serious injury that's going to affect your later life, like what has perhaps happened to me and other members of our family, why, it's well to get out. But we're very proud of what David has done, and David, as I mentioned, is one of the inventors of some of the new wonderful pool games that we have. A very, very, very fine child.
Okay, that's grandkids. Just the pictures of sports grandkids anyway. We just don't happen to have any pictures of big pictures of the girls. Wait a minute.
Yeah, we have a big picture.
Where is
we have a picture of Jamie.
Jamie. Let me shut this off a minute and I'll get that picture out.
Susan and John Zentner Jr. Jamie is very fortunate to have such a wonderful mother as Susan. Susan has gone out of her way to help in every way with those three kids, with Jeffy and Jamie and Johnny. She's done just a super job. And incidentally, Jamie is quite an athlete and a very, very good student. We're real proud of Jamie. Over here, we're going to look at Kristen. This is Jim and Sandy, little girl.
Wait a minute, I got the wrong picture here going. Here we go.
Okay. Kristen is just a marvelous little gal. She's a pretty good athlete herself and a good student. They live up in Danville. And her mother, Sandy, is just absolutely a doll. Sandy has helped Mom, Joni, my wife, so much. Has helped me. We went up and lived there while we were undergoing medical problems, and the same thing applies to Susan. Those are two just perfect daughter-in-laws. We just couldn't have better daughter-in-laws. Now, over here we've got Tasha. Tasha was born down in Fort Worth in December of 1987, so she's almost 2 years old, and she is the daughter of Jackie and of Keith Thomas. And she
now they've got another baby since, but I don't think we've got.
I don't think we have a picture of Kirk, and we just don't have him, and I don't think we have.
Maybe if we can find him. I think I turned it off here. This is part of being an amateur performance, but the cameraman is screwing up right here. So anyway, we don't have a picture of Kirk. So okay. When Mom talks, hopefully we'll be able to find something to show.
Find something on Kirk, and we got to show them
John too.
John and JJ.
Yeah.
So we'll try to find those pictures. But we're proud of all of them. I mean, all of them seem to have the right stuff going for them. And well, in conclusion on this particular segment, I want to tell all of you what I said at the outset. I think you're very fortunate in having this family back down through the years. I might mention my cousin John Zentner, who we call Bun, B-U-N, who's a former head of the Federal Aviation, who lives in Belmont, and he and his daughter Sarah and his wife Lola May have been just darling to us. We talk to Bunzi quite often, and had any of you ever run into him, or maybe some of his descendants, just remember that John S. Zentner, Bun Zentner, was a super guy.
Trying to find some pictures of some of the other grandchildren, and we found a group shot of Jackie and her family. That's JJ on the left there. She's getting to be a big girl. She's about 5'10" now, I think. That's John there in the center. He's getting to be a big kid. Tasha there, and this is before Kirk was born, so we still don't have a picture of their family. This is Keith. Anyway, that about rounds out the grandchildren, and in a few moments we're going to start talking to Nanny. Turn, Mom. I want you to introduce yourself to your grandchildren, your
When do I press the button?
It's on, and you are on their video.
Did I do it without pressing the button?
I did it for you.
Thank you a lot.
Okay, you're on camera.
You're really kidding me. Am I really on?
You're on.
Okay. My name is Joan Regina Shire Zentner. I was born January 31st, 1922. Don't I look young? I have to tell you about from whence I came. My grandmother's name was Regina Carroll, her maiden name. My grandfather's name, the man she eventually married, was Zalish, S-A-L-L-U-C-H, Shire, S-C-H-E-Y-E-R. My grandmother met my grandfather in Germany, and she was 17 years younger than he, and came over from Germany with him after he had gone back to Germany, and he brought her back as a young bride. He went to work in his, I think it was his grandfather's wholesale hosiery and handkerchief store. He became very successful and was rather wealthy. He was a short, stocky man, about 5'6", and a German, and he drank a fifth of whiskey every day of his life.
Runs in the family.
Runs in the family. My grandmother and he were married for 54 years. He died when he was 89, and my grandmother died when she was 76. Did I say they were 17 years apart? They were 13 years apart, right?
Right.
Okay, so that was my first mistake. Her background was way back. They came from Spain, and during the Spanish Inquisition, they left Spain, and her family moved to Germany. And her name was Carol, which evidently was the Spanish name.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so there is way back some Spanish blood. Perhaps that's the reason for my dark hair and eyes. And my father had dark hair and dark eyes. My mother's name was Flora Harris, and she was a lovely lady, blonde hair, blue-eyed, and rather small, very short. My father was dark-haired and dark-eyed, and his name was Felix Shire. He died when he was 54 years of age. Excuse me, the second mistake. My mother lived to be 68. She had 5 sisters, and my father had a sister and a brother. Okay, now where do I go from there?
No, that's good. You know, there's a story.
My mother's mother name was Johanna Victor, and my mother's father's name was, I think it was Isaac Harris, and they were first cousins. And because of that, in those days in Germany, they didn't know one another, and he had traveled many miles to visit his distant relatives and first cousin, and he fell in love with Johanna Victor and brought her over to America. And they moved into a small town of Livermore, which is now quite a city in California. And he was a shoemaker by trade, a cobbler. And he made quite a bit of money. He did very well. But because they had 6 daughters, and the population was so small. My grandmother had the good common sense to take these 6 girls out of Livermore and they moved to San Francisco. And that's where my mother met my father, and her name was Flora Harris, and that's where she met my father, Felix Shire, and that's where they were married. My father was considered a very good catch because his folks had a lot of money, but actually it didn't help that much. They had some financial problems because I was sick as a youngster, and they were always under financial pressure because I was in the hospital so often.
Why were you always in the hospital?
Because I was always in the hospital because I had what they call something that is extinct now, it's mastoids. And with the invention of penicillin and antibiotics, this has become an extinct
it was an ear thing.
The ear thing, disease. Well, just like streptococcus is no longer serious disease.
Question you were going to answer.
What?
Well, I wanted to know about her great-grandparents. If you
Oh, I don't know
that much
anything.
I have a favorite grandparent story I wish you'd tell them.
What is the favorite
About
grandparent?
your grandparents that were 13 years apart and how close they were and how, was it your grandmother, your grandfather was so sick in the hospital? That's my story that gives
Okay,
me
and this
goosebumps.
is a true story, and it was in the San Francisco Chronicle or Examiner newspaper. My grandfather and grandmother were married for 54 years and were a very devoted couple. And when my grandfather fell when he was 87, and he was in great shape because he walked 4 miles every day. So up until the time he was 87, he was in marvelous shape. But he fell, he broke his hip, and then of course was, for the rest of that time until he passed away, he was bedridden. And my grandmother at 76 was pretty healthy. She was not very tall. She was about 5'4", but she looked like about 5'8". She had a very good figure, and she was very active. And my grandfather was ill and bedridden with a nurse. And my grandmother had gone...
Bedridden with a nurse.
Well, that was nice too, wasn't it? No, but I mean, he was bedridden. He always had a nurse and attendant. And my grandmother had gone to do some grocery shopping and was hit by an automobile and was taken to the hospital and passed away that same evening. My grandfather, who was in a semi-coma, or wasn't in a coma and dying, for some reason no one had told him, but he knew, he kept calling Regina, and of course she wasn't there. And the next day, the day after she passed away, he said, "Regina, I'm coming," and he started to count 1, 2, 3, 4, and he died. And that is a true story, and it was in the newspapers. So if you ever wonder about life after death, or the impossible, or these things will happen, and it's hard to believe, but this is an actual story because I was there, because I spent that night with my grandfather in the hotel room where he died.
So anyway, you grew up in San Francisco.
I grew up in San Francisco, and
What age were you when were you born in San Francisco?
I was born in San Francisco at Mount Zion Hospital, and like 3 of my children were, and
You have one sister.
And I have one sister, and her name is Jane Shire Wilson. She's married to Robert Rathbun Wilson, who is Dr. Robert Rathbun. He is a PhD and a very famous physicist. They are probably the most famous member of any of our family that I know of. And they are in Who's Who, which is a publication about who's who, all the famous people in America. And he, under Dr. Robert Oppenheimer, was one of the 6 men that worked on the atomic bomb, one of the 6 main physicists that worked on the atomic bomb. And as a matter of fact, he's been on many television
couple of shows. And stuff.
Well, they're the
He's been played by actors and stuff.
by actors, but also
On what
they're
happened in Los Alamos.
What are they called now? They're when they do stories on the educational channels.
Oh, right.
PBS.
Well, like public television, but they're documentaries. That was the word I was trying to think of. And my sister's also been on with him. And right now, there's a picture being made, and probably by the time you see this, you won't even know who Paul Newman is. But Paul Newman is making a movie called, I think, what's it, Dad? Big Man, Big Something, Little Man.
Big
And
Man,
it's
Little Man? Or
something, it's coming out, and they had to get permission from Robert Wilson to get a character actor to play his role in the movie. So he is really very famous, and they have just built a new home in Los Alamos, although he's 76, I think he's 76 years old. My sister's 5.5 years older than I am. It makes her pretty old, but she's in better shape physically.
Anyway, back to the beginning of where you grew up in San Francisco. Where did you go to school? And
I went to a Madison Grammar School, and I went to Lowell High School. I was not particularly a good student and could have cared less. I wish I could go back now and...
What is the first thing that you can remember in your life?
The first thing I can remember in my life is singing Me and My Shadow, strolling down the avenue and performing for
Would you like to do it now?
Yes, when I was about 3 years old. And I still know the words, but the only thing that I used to think is that the words in it were all along in Fielding's Blue instead of and Feeling Blue. For years I thought...
Maybe you would rather do, what was the little record, let's see, what was the record? Maybe you'd rather do Day In, Day Out.
No, I would prefer not to do Day In and Day Out. Anyhow, it was a very unexciting existence that I had, and...
Did you have lots of boyfriends?
Well, I'm going to say so, don't be silly. Of course, they were just knocking the doors down all the time. I had a few boyfriends. I wasn't exactly like my daughter Judy, but I did all right.
Would you mind telling us about the first real love of your life?
I would prefer not to, with your father sitting there.
Oh, I thought maybe it was my father.
The first real love of my life probably was your father.
Okay, well, you can move ahead to college now, which was very short.
You were in San Francisco. Did your parents experience the big...
My mother lived through, my mother was very bright. Of the 6 girls, she was the only one that graduated from the University of California when she was 19 years of age. She was very, very smart. And my sister also graduated from the University of California in 1938, and she graduated magna cum laude Phi Beta Kappa. Very smart, and my mother was very bright. My father was, I think, pretty bright too. Also, I don't know where I came from. I don't know, because I wasn't that intelligent.
Tell us about the earthquake.
I couldn't tell you much about the earthquake, but my mother told me about it. See, I was 17 when my father passed away, so I didn't know, and he worked hard, and he was on the road a lot. He had kind of a tough life. He worked for his father, but really was his father's only help, and he traveled a lot. And
What did he do?
He worked for his dad. He was a salesman on the road selling hosiery and handkerchiefs for his father's household. As a matter of fact, it would help to kill him because he used to pack these big, heavy cases. And now I digress.
The earthquake.
Well, the earthquake. Well, my mother talked about it. Unfortunately, it hit. If you're familiar with San Francisco, it hit Market Street and went back as far as Van Ness Avenue. And the earthquake.
What year that was?
1905, I think. It was either 1905 or 1906. I'm not sure. One of those years. It was either 1905 that my mother...
But your parents were living in San Francisco.
Oh, my parents were living in San Francisco, and my mother and father were not married then. But my mother can remember. I mean, she was the one that told me about the earthquake wasn't nearly as bad as the fire. It was the fire that was so devastating. And it was, they were virtually untouched because I guess they lived beyond Van Ness Avenue. I mean, everybody was touched in San Francisco. I mean, it was a tragedy. But, and then she talks about the 1918, I guess it was 1918 World's Fair that they had the famous World's Fair. And she had some pieces that my sister has, some marble and some things that, marble statuettes that my sister now owns, that they bought at that fair. And
So you went to grade school, high school?
grade school.
You went to college?
And I met my husband at the University of California.
Tell us a story about how you met Dad.
Well, do I have to go through all this? Okay. I had...
Well, briefly.
Well, it can't be very well. This is going to be this is a documentary in itself,
Right.
isn't it?
Really.
I had seen your father, my husband, and he was a tall, blonde, kind of ugly
And
guy.
tell us what his name is, just to keep the record
Oh,
straight.
well, his name, of course, is John Ralph Zentner, Sr., and he was 6'3½", blonde, Norwegian, good-looking, big nose, and he used to go around with a guy by the name of Aldaggett, who, that doesn't mean anything in your life, and he was a big, tall, dark, handsome brute, but I kind of liked that blonde guy, and I'd see him around, and I'd go up to International House with my girlfriend, which was up the block from where I was staying, and I'd have a hamburger, and there were these two fellas, and one day I said to my best girlfriend, Alberta Moore, I said to her, I want you to see a guy I think is real cute. Hurry, let's go over and see him. And I dragged her over to see this big blonde guy sitting on the steps. And she said, oh, you think he's cute? I think he stinks. True story. And anyway, I saw this guy, and then I went out on a date one night, and we stopped at a place called Jules, which was a little, like a hamburger joint, and after the date, that was the place to go. And sitting in the, and here was this blonde guy who I didn't know from Adam, sitting in the next booth with the date, and here I was sitting in the booth, and I kept looking over at him, and he kept looking over at me, although he probably doesn't remember. And I thought, there is a cute guy. And time passed, and then one day I was with a girlfriend, and we went to what they call the Co-op, which is the place where you have Cokes and hamburgers, and there was this blonde guy again, and this friend of mine, her name, I'll never forget it, and she wasn't that close a friend, her name was Gwen Maddox, and she said, oh, Joan, you want to join the Young Republicans Club? And I said, sure. She said, well, now let's go over, there's John Zentner over there, let's go over and find out if he wants to join the Young Republicans Club. And I said, sure, let's go over and see if he wants to join the Young Republicans Club. I would have joined the Communist Party, anything. I didn't give a hoot. So we go over, and she introduces me to this fellow, and we talk, and I didn't remember his name. Oh, I was just horrified. Here I was, met this guy who I'd seen for the last 2 months that I thought was so adorable, and I couldn't remember his name. And anyway, as I was walking one day down to classes at Burke, he was walking up toward his fraternity house, and he said, I was walking to class, he said, would you like to go have a Coke? And I said, sure. So that was the start of it, and we went and had a Coke, and I paid for my own Coke. He was a real winner. Why, he was a real, last of the big time spenders. And he was a real cute guy, and we dated quite a bit. And anyway, now let's see what else I was going to say.
Well, that's about the time that...
Well, you can keep going.
Well, let me stop and tell us about what.
No, I mean, no, it wasn't just about it. I mean,
No.
obviously there was more than that.
Well, that was, then we went out and we dated. Then he went and he became a midshipman, and we separated. In the meantime, transpiring, this was the beginning, the start of World War II. As you probably know if you read your history books, in 1933, Hitler came into power in Germany, and they were starting to get on all the Jews and the Catholics and the dissidents who Hitler was believed in all pure white Aryan supremacy. Is that where you'd put it? And I'm going to go back a little bit because in 1937, my father died in 1939, but in 1937, when there were stories in America about Jews being slaughtered over there by the millions, and some religious people and the anti-Hitlerites, we had, of course, relatives in Germany. And as far as I know, their name was Shire. Now, there's also been a question about that, but I know that there was a 17-year-old boy by the name of Philip Shire, and they needed to get the family together to get, I think, $4,000 or $5,000, which at that time was a lot of money.
You might just want to stop and introduce the friend that's playing behind you.
Incidentally, excuse me, this is the newest member of our family, and his name is Mai Tai. And Mai Tai is a Siamese cat who I absolutely adore. He is a sweet, darling little Siamese cat, and he has taken the place of another Siamese cat that I lost a little over a year ago that I loved, and he is just adorable.
And our other cat's name
was Tai. His name is Mai Tai, Maithai, and he is probably the sweetest little cat that ever existed. And I wouldn't take it.
You wouldn't say that if you just see him popping your wallpaper behind.
That's all right. He could do anything he wanted. They said, where does the lion sleep? Anywhere he wants to. Well, where does Mai Tai, what can he do? Anything he wants.
Except get on the sink and the table.
Except get on the sink and the table.
All right, you can go back to your ward.
All right, anyway, so they had to accumulate $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000, and my father did not have a lot of money. And he scrounged up, I think, $200 or $300, which at that time, it doesn't seem like anything now, was a small fortune to them. But he did have some rather well-to-do relatives, and altogether they did accumulate the amount of money that was needed and they sent it over to Germany and this Philip Shire, who was 17, and at the time I think I was 15. And so it had been decided upon that he was to come and live with my family, myself and my mother and dad. And they sent this money over to try and save his life, and that money was sent to Germany, and he was never heard of again, nor was the money. And so he was probably killed along with.
No doubt about it.
Oh, no doubt about it. And I think about that very, very often, because right now he would have been about 69 years of age, and God only knows whatever happened to those poor people. Anyhow, go back. Then this World War II was edging up, and my husband became a cadet. He went to he was in the Navy ROTC, and was sent to various places. And in the meantime, I had this very distant cousin who was stationed, I think, at Fort Ord or somewhere in California, and he came to see me, and he was very nice looking, and he was the only one I ever knew that he had a Buick convertible, brand new Buick convertible. I was very, very impressed, and he liked me, and sent me telegrams, and we corresponded quite a bit. And then my husband when he came to town, called me up again. We started going out again, and I wrote this cousin that the boy that I really cared about was back in town, and he sent me a telegram, and it was a cute one saying, I hope you will be happy, and it was very cute. And then I guess that was the last time I ever heard from him. And anyhow, time transpired, and in 1941 I went to New Orleans, and we got married and lived in a little tiny garage, converted garage, first time I'd ever seen a bed bug. And that is where John Jr., my oldest son, was born. We came, fortunately.
What does that have to do with the bed bug?
It was just the way we had to live then. I was just explaining, because you people never had to live the way the conditions, and you hear many, many stories about World War II, the terrible places. However, they treated you in World War II as a serviceman, and your grandfather was started out as an ensign in the Navy. We were treated royally. We were stationed in New Orleans. We were stationed in New York, and your father, and he was your father, my husband. He's not your father. It'll probably be your great grandfather or your grandfather. Was on ships being sent overseas and always in danger because it was the World War II was very rough war, as all wars are, and Americans were very much for this war because it was a very patriotic war, and it was a very important war because God only knows if the Germans had won where we'd be today. And we were also Russia. Russia was our ally, and Japan got into this war. If you read your history, you know about this. And although I was very young and didn't really, I would know more about it. Like I was explaining to the kids, I would know more about it today because I was busy. I had busy having babies and really didn't know quite as much what was going on. All I was interested in is if my husband came home safe, and he was sent overseas for 3 months at a time, 4 months at a time. And when we were stationed in New York, he was to go, it was a rainy day, and he was to go to the European zone on a ship. And I kissed him goodbye, and I was teary-eyed, and my mother was in New York with me. And he left to go aboard ship, and it was one of the saddest days of my life. And all of a sudden, the telephone rings about 2 hours after I kissed him goodbye. He says, "I'm coming back. They kicked me off the ship because I have an ulcerated tooth."
Oh, I thought that was out of Treasure Island.
No, that was in New York.
Oh.
And that was probably his bad teeth probably may have saved his life, because he was taken off the ship because he had that bad tooth, and came back to the hotel where we were staying.
You lived in a hotel?
Yeah. He was making $285 a month, and the hotel was $220 a month. Fortunately, I had a mother, and he had a father who helped us out, and they were lots of fun in New York because they treated the service people it's a long story, but we would go to the Waldorf Astoria, which may not even be there when you see this tape, but Xavier Cugat, this famous orchestra leader, was there, and we'd go to the top dancing for $2 or $3 and have dinner, and it was wonderful. And we went to the Store Club and all the famous nightclubs, and on very, very little money. It would cost us thousands a day just to do what we did in those times. Anyway, because of this tooth, he had orders to go back to San Francisco by ship. So we immediately went back by train, my mother, myself, and Johnny Jr., and went back to San Francisco and
John Jr. was there? Well, of course, he was. He was living in a hotel with you, too.
Yeah, he was there. He was a tiny baby. And we'd go back to San Francisco, and from there, we stayed with my mother in my mother's house, and he did have a couple of trips over Southeast Asia, over to where was it, Guam, and he was on convoy ships, and he was a naval officer on moving army troops into the zones. And when Jim Zentner, my second son, was born, he was overseas, and it wasn't until he was 2 months old, or a month and a half old, Dad, that you realized that you had a son. When the Red Cross tried to get you, but how old was Jim when you got back? You remember? About a month and a half. And so, but then we stayed with my mother until the duration of the end of the war, which was in 1946. And we had we had several breaks. One was that dental problem he had, which could have saved his life. And another break was that right toward the end of the war, he was supposed to go out again into the war zone. And because there was And if you've ever heard of the name Vanderbilt, it's a long story and I won't go into it now, but we met him, and through him, because my husband went back to Washington, D.C. and got orders to remain in San Francisco till the end of the war. That was a big break.
Vanderbilt, big money.
Yeah, Cornelius Vanderbilt.
Really?
Cornelius Vanderbilt. Didn't you ever hear that story? Oh, I think it's a wonderful story.
Well, tell us the story.
Okay, I had a girlfriend by the name of Bernie Sherlock, and she was writing for a newspaper at the time, and this war stories, and working was this Cornelius, I think it was Cornelius Vanderbilt. Was it Junior Dad, or was it?
He's not listening.
Well, anyway, Cornelius Vanderbilt, and they're very famous, very, very rich family, one of the most famous rich families. And this girlfriend of mine calls me up and she says, guess who I'm going out with tonight? And I said, I have no idea. She said, Cornelius Vanderbilt is taking me to the Mark Hopkins for dinner tonight. And I said, you're kidding me. And she said, no, you and John have to come up to the Mark and meet him. And we used to kind of like to go out to the nightclubs, and my mother was there, babysitting, pretty nice, and so we went up to you've heard the story, haven't you, Jude? And we went up to the Mark Hopkins Hotel, and here was my girlfriend, Bernie Sherlock, with Cornelius Vanderbilt, and a whole group of people, all sitting around a table in the main ballroom of the Mark Hopkins Hotel, and we were invited to join the party, and of course we didn't, everybody else was sponging off of him because he was the big shot and had lots of money in his wallet. But we didn't take advantage of that because we had our own table, but we came over there and we met him, and it's a good thing that we didn't just bump into him. If she had introduced me to Cornelius Vanderbilt, I'd have said yes, and this is J.P. Morgan, who is another, I would have thought it was a joke, but it was actually Cornelius Vanderbilt. And Daddy met, when we were sitting there in this group, he was talking to this friend of Cornelius Vanderbilt, and he said, I unfortunately just got orders to go out to sea again, and I shouldn't be going because I just came back. And this gentleman pulls out his card, and he said, can you get to Washington, D.C.? And my husband kind of looks at him, and I guess I could. He said, well, hands my husband a card, and he said, go see some ensign in, what was it called, the Pentagon?
Ensign St. Clair.
Ensign St. Clair in Washington, D.C., at the Pentagon there. And Dad, we scrounged up the $300 or whatever it was for the plane fare, and the next day, John, my husband, got on he was a lieutenant commander in the Navy, and he gets on the airplane and flies back, goes up into this vast Pentagon, and here he was, lieutenant commander, to see some ensign, walks in, and there's people sitting around waiting to see this Ensign St. Clair, and he shows this card. They tell my husband to go right in. He sits down with this Ensign St. Clair, and Ensign St. Clair says, well, he looks at his orders, he says, well, what do you want to do? And Daddy says, well, I think I'd like to stay in San Francisco. He says, okay, and he writes down orders for his cancellation of his orders to go to Guam or wherever the heck it was, and he says, you're stationed at, where was it you were?
Port Director's Office.
At the port, you're now one of the heads of the Port Director's Office in San Francisco, and there you will remain because the war is coming to an end, and there you will remain till the duration. That night, my husband gets on an airplane, comes back to San Francisco, and that is where he remained at the Port Director's Office in San Francisco.
Who you know makes a big difference.
And so it isn't what you know, it's who you know. And that was the second big break. That's another thing that might have kept, because there were quite a few people killed right at the end there. Convoy ships being blown up. So that we had some breaks early in life. Then Jim was born when...
You've had a few since, too.
Yeah, lots of breaks since. You're right. And then Jim was born, and then we got, in 1946, I guess it was, we got out of this. I wanted my, in a way, I think my husband wanted to stay in the service as lieutenant commander and stay in the Navy, but his father owned and had 2 automobile agencies here in Merced, and they were hard to come by. And he had at that time, the Chevrolet, I beg your pardon, not the Chevrolet, the Chrysler Plymouth, and the Nash car agency. Nash, incidentally, was a car. And anyway, he had to give up one of the agencies, so he was very insistent that his oldest son, John, come back to Merced and take over that Nash agency, which at the time it was pretty lucrative because automobiles were hard to come by. You know, they had really stopped making automobiles for quite a few years there during the war. That you didn't get a new car because there were none to be had. So we came back to Merced with our 2 little boys and moved into a little rental house of about 750 square feet with these 2 children. And in the interim, I had my 3rd child, which happily was a little girl. And I had my husband would have liked to have had 8 or 9 boys and no girls. And when my girl was born, I was so ecstatic.
You might like to mention her name.
Her name was Judith Ann Zentner. Now it is Judith Ann Bortnam, and I'm sure that you didn't Father mention it in his tape and talk about my darling daughter Judy, who now thinks she is my mother. Then she was born, so 3 little children lived in that little 750 square foot house. And if my husband John had his way, he does
So
not
that's
like
1946.
Well, she was born, yeah, she was there. All right, we're up to 1946. She was born August 10th, 1946. So I was getting very, very unhappy in these very...
Well, and Merced was new to you. You were a city.
Yeah, and Merced was new to me, and I was not very happy here. I liked San Francisco a lot better, and it was a cliquey, small town of about 7,000 population. And my husband's parents, Florence and Sam Zentner, were lovely, lovely people, but they were well known in the community, very well known, but they were not very social. And so consequently, I didn't get really to meet any people through them. And my husband's sister just didn't like me very, very much, and I don't know why, but she really didn't. And she didn't have very many friends, so I had to make friends on my own. And finally, through a next door neighbor, I got to know a few people and went to a few bridge. It was kind of lonely and unpleasant for me the first few years here, but it's a good, Merced is where we're living now, is a good place to raise youngsters. Anyway, after
So how long did you live in that house?
all right, that's what I'm getting to. After that was in 1946 when Judy was born. In 1947 or 48, my father-in-law, who had a little money, was not a rich man, but was comfortably well-to-do, bought us 3 lots, 3 50-foot lots here in Merced. And eventually we built the home, and where you see me sitting right now, it's still the same home. And that was we moved in here in September of 1949. And here it is almost September. It is September of 89, 40 years. And we're still in the same house. And it's still pretty nice. It could be a lot worse.
Well, they've seen the pictures of the outside of the house. We went and took pictures of the whole...
Well, right now I'm sitting in my living room, which is...
impressive house.
Right now I'm sitting in our living room, which they said is nice to look at, but not the unlived-in living room, and it's true. When I had the 4 youngsters, this house was like a summer place. We had nothing but kids here and
We'll go back for a second.
festivities.
You're moving here in 49, but then the family goes on, because we hear about 4 kids, but we probably only heard about
We
3.
haven't. We missed our Jackie. Then in the year that I moved in here, I was pregnant. And I don't know what happened, but I had a miscarriage. And in those days, they did not know about blood and everything, and I am an Rh negative person, which during the war, they discovered that Rh factor people had trouble with second and third babies, and I was very fortunate to have had 3 healthy babies without any problems. But because I had a miscarriage in 1940, the year I moved into this house, my doctor in San Francisco tested me, and I was Rh factor, which you probably will know about now because it's not a bad thing anymore. And I found that I miscarried, and I think it was what would have been a boy, and he would have been 1949, he would have been 40 years old. And then, because I promised Dad I'd have another baby if we built this house, in 1952, my 4th child was born, and that was Jacqueline Florida Zentner. She was lovely looking, my prettiest baby. And we won't discuss how my other babies looked when they were born. Judy was pretty cute. Jackie was adorable. Anyway, so then in we had planned to build a swimming pool and do all those things, but the building got to be pretty excessive and expensive. And in 1957, we built a swimming pool. And from then on, it was well used, and we had every kid in the neighborhood and every kid in the whole world come over here. And this house was heavily used until they all left. Now, where else shall I go? There probably are lots of wonderful stories to be told, but
Well, Dad's told the stories about the kids.
and the boys and their sports, and I'm sure he said that you were a diving champion.
No.
He did
We
not?
covered football well. We didn't get around to girls' sports. And
Oh, of course we didn't get around
He
to
said
it.
I was a cheerleader.
Judy wasn't a cheerleader, she was a letter carrier. And Judy's my 3rd child. My boys are big. John Jr., did he say how large they were? John Jr. is about 6, or I don't know how tall he is now, but he's 6'5.5". And Jim's 6'4.5". Judy was about 5'2", and then
3, thank you.
well, she
3.
says.
No, I am 5'3".
Oh, she said she's 5'3", and Jackie is about 5'9" or so. So they're pretty big kids, and they say that smoking, and I was and am a smoker, smoking cigarettes, probably by the time you see that there won't be such a thing. You'll just see them in old movies, but cigarettes are supposed to stunt the growth of your children, and if I hadn't smoked cigarettes, I could have had a couple of 7'2" or 3 or 4. And they also say it creates a lot of wrinkles. So here I am, 67-year-old, a shriveled up old bag, and look at just how I would have been wrinkle-free if it hadn't been for cigarettes. So anyway, okay. The boys were, of course, very athletic, and most of my youth and raising my kids was spent with special meals for boys who were active in sports. And then comes my little blonde daughter, who is all my youngsters, fortunately, because we did have a swimming pool, were very good, fine swimmers. And Judy became a diver and was a lovely diver and was the county diving champion, and did have possibilities of going on to greater things such as training for Olympics, etc., but in order to do that, she would have to go up to San Francisco and to faraway places from here and work under people like Dr. Sammy Lee, who are famous divers, and get lessons, and it wasn't worth it to her. She didn't want it that desperately, and I was delighted because I wasn't that anxious to have to transport her 2 or 3 times a week. So her diving career ended in Little Merced as the county diving champion. And Jackie went on and did plays in high school, and probably to this day I think would have been a very, very fine actress. I really, really do. I think she missed her field, her real talent in life, because she would have been great at it, and did high school plays and was very, very good.
Great model.
And
we had the pictures.
And she was a beautiful model,
Do
because
you have any pictures of her modeling?
I took lots of pictures. I got all of the clippings that I could get, but I think when she was here, she swiped them and got them back, because I had all the newspaper clippings that she sent and all the glossies that she sent, I kept. And then all of a sudden they disappeared. And of course, unfortunately, we'll never probably retrieve them, and they've probably been destroyed, or God only knows what happened to them, because she was a beautiful, beautiful model and could have done that. But more than that, she photographs beautifully, and she would have been she missed her calling. It's just too bad. If we'd lived in LA or someplace where there was the opportunity, that's the worst part about living in a place like Merced, is you do miss a lot of opportunities. Whereas if you live in a place like San Francisco, and particularly in the Los Angeles area, if you have much talent, it could be discovered much more easily there, right?
Well, since your kids moved out and everybody's moved away, married and whatsoever, what are you doing nowadays to
Well, what am I doing nowadays?
keep yourself busy?
Oh, I'll keep, well, yes, we will come up today. Well, finally, Jackie left in 1973, and I also have 10 grandchildren. I'm sure Pop must have Daddy must have mentioned
we got
that.
through all those, except we don't have a picture of Kirk.
Well, we'll get a picture of John John.
We showed John John.
Did you have John John?
We got a family picture.
Okay, well, a Kirk, and we'll get little Kirky is on here.
Probably the last of the Mohicans.
Hopefully it's the last. I think 10 grandchildren are enough. It's hard for me to keep track now.
No, the rest of us are getting pretty old.
Yeah, we're all getting pretty old.
We're all looking at being grandparents ourselves.
That's right. And in the interim, unfortunately, although I have been a very, very lucky woman, because I have had 4 nice kids, and my youngsters have been very, very good to us, and I have no regrets, no remorse. I had a very nice life. I've had a very nice home. Always had plenty to eat. We've had a few reverses, financial and otherwise, but unfortunately, old Father Time has gotten a hold of us, and I've had 2 broken hips and a broken knee within the last couple of years that were accidental falls, and also I have arthritis in the back, which is a crippling disease, and has left me a little bit incapacitated. I think that would be or Judy would prefer to say spastic, because that's what my neurologist calls it, is spasticity. And my husband, who is a semi-diabetic, has lost a leg, which he's recuperating nicely from. However, he does have a hip that needs operating on, and because of his health situation, it would be a precarious operation. Now, whether that operation can be done to help him remains to be seen, and that will be in the next chapter of the Zentners. I think I probably missed a million different stories, and will regret not having put it on the tape, but as you go along, you forget things, and there's events, and certainly I can't say our life has been very eventful, but it certainly wasn't uneventful. And I did have a house full of love and laughter and happiness, and a few tears, but I think maybe there was more happiness than tears, and I think you can say that you're very fortunate. And is there anything else that you think I've left out?
I think we're going to get Dad in here for just a second, and maybe we can just...
If he wants to.
Well, Dad right now I think is engrossed in the baseball game. And he may also be back.
Well, we can add on to this as years go on.
Can we
too.
add, as years go on?
That's right, as years
Sure.
go on.
Yeah. So,
Tomorrow, we're gonna go by and see the house that you moved into when you...
well, I think that would be
said.
very, that 750 square foot house, I'm sure would be a complete joy to these kids. And you can see why I was rather anxious to build this house. And we had some tough times. This house was an very expensive house.
Dad kind of alluded to a period of time when he was commuting to Oakland.
Oh, there was a period. Now we're talking about things that I don't know that they'd be that interested. We had some rough times. There was a time where we had some financial problem where he sold his Nash agency and had no work offered to him here. And in 1960, I think it was in the 60s, he was offered a managerial job up in the Oakland area, and went up there, and it was very, very hard because we were going to move up to that area, and that's the area that Jim lives now, and that's in the Walnut Creek area up by San Francisco. So if any of you kids are living up there, you'll know. And I even went up there and had bought a house, a new house that was just being built, or just finished being built, and I bought a house in Orinda, but we had not sold this house here, and I just couldn't see taking on the financial responsibility of that house while we still had this house. So that next morning, after staying awake all night, worrying about how we were going to maintain two houses until this one was sold, I called my husband at 7 o'clock in the morning and I said, tell that real estate agent that we cannot take that house up there. And that morning he walked in and he quit his job up there because the separation was very, very difficult. And had the whole story of Judy Zentner would not have been Judy Bortnam. James Zentner would not have married Sandy Zentner. John Zentner would not have married Susan Zentner. And God knows how many times Jackie would have married and who she would have married. And our whole story, it just shows you how one move can affect the lives of so many people. And he came back here and finally went to work at John Ross Chevrolet as a manager, first as a salesman, then as a manager. And I guess did he tell how he bought the insurance business from his son, John? So all that's been told. And the story is
Is there anything you might like to say to your future grandchildren? No, probably not grandchildren, because you've seen all of them, but
well, even my grandchildren.
maybe some of those little ones you won't see when they're 30.
The little ones won't remember.
These are stories you've told tonight that your grandchildren have never heard.
Well,
Even your grandchildren.
Well, even my son-in-law's never heard, and I was sure I had
What would you
told
like
him.
to say anything to your grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-great?
I hope they grew up to be good, solid, honest, hardworking citizens that enjoy life and stay well. And good Americans, because we're very lucky to live here in this country. And what else can I say? I hope they have a happy life. I hope their lives have been happy as mine has been up to now. Amen.
You did a great job.
You don't get a chance to, you think of all the things.
Yeah, but I know, but you know, it's better to be extemporaneous than to try and, of course, it would be fun.
No, but I mean, it would have been more in context. That's what I'm talking about.
Now, you could go back and say, this is the way I'd rather have done it, and do it all over again and say, I would did it better, but
you know,
I can't get you to do it.
But you know, what I said is true. I've had but really very nice life. I can't complain about my life.
They were still damp, wasn't I lucky?
Yes.
Didn't she do a good job?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, you're not going to
You
tell
did
me.
a great job.
I think,
Sure.
I mean, I wish it had been more in context. You know, I could think of so many things that
Oh, I know.
you wanted to start from.
I'm going to make a copy for each one of the kids, and they're going to
You'll have to be responsible for their
love it and be responsible for their copy.
Yeah, they won't give a hoot. But it's true. You don't think, you know, I didn't know what was going on.
But Wouldn't you be interested in sitting and seeing a videotape of your grandparents and them telling about their
I'd
parents?
be interested in even seeing the grandparents that I knew up until the time I was
Exactly.
15.
Exactly.
Who, you know, my grandfather Shire, who
You
was,
can kind of remember them, but wouldn't it be great to just
because
watch
he was such a fine.
1969, and we're standing in front of the home that I used to live in, that my dad and mother built in 1924. And I think we moved in 1925. I was about 5 years old. It's really a lovely home. The last time I was in it was in 1960, which is a long time ago, almost 30 years ago. The house has actually 6 bedrooms, and very, very spacious, and it's nicely laid out. Now in the back, we used to play a lot of games, golf games and stuff like that, and various other games. And in this whole block, we had a lot of kids, the Garners, the Kings, the Striblings, and so on and so forth, the Garretts. We used to play games. One of the nice parts, as far as we were concerned, we lived so close to the library and to the tennis court. And we not only played sports, but we used to spend a lot of time studying. And this is what you have to do, grandkids and great-grandkids. You have to spend time in the library, and you should spend some time on the playing field, keeping in shape, and learning good sportsmanship. Now, right next door to this house is where John Jr. lived later on. Several years ago, John Jr. rented this house. It originally belonged to Gene Freeman and his wife, Cash Freeman, who was a Pontiac dealer. My dad was a Chevrolet dealer. So the Pontiac dealer and the Chevrolet dealer lived side by side. And after the war, when we came back, Joan and I, my wife Joan and I, and our family, John and Jim were around at that time. Judy hadn't been born yet. Lived in another house, which we're going to show you right down the street, a small house, and we spent a little time there. But most of the time we spent right over there at 921 West 22nd Street. That was downtown to us, and that's where we all originally came from. Every one of you, grandkids, great-grandkids, and whatever you are, 150, 200 years from now, we'll look back, and that's where we lived. It was a great area. Okay, and then we're going to move on now and show you some other sites. And remember, we had fun here, and it was decent growing up in this area. At West 22nd Street, just one house between this and our old homestead of 921 West 22nd. How could I forget? And this is where Joan and I and Johnny and ultimately Judy lived until for about 2 years after the war, 1945 and 1946 and 1947. We spent a little time at 935, but most of the time we spent over at the folks' house. Okay, we'll move on now and show you some other stuff about the family. 935 West 22nd Street, we live in East 22nd Street in Merced. Some pictures of a lot of these grandparents and grandmas of you folks. We're going to look at it right now and I'll tell you who they are. Ralph Zentner, taken evidently when he's probably about 40 years of age, a man that served in the Civil War under General Grant, my grandfather. And you notice he has a slightly receding hairline. Okay.
Is that a family resemblance?
Well, it seems to be, it's been carrying on for about 10 generations maybe. Okay. Father, that's Florence Williams Zentner on the left, of course, and that's my dad, Sam Wentworth Zentner, Sr., taken about 1959, which is, excuse me, around 1950, probably about the time that he passed away. Father Felix Shire, a San Francisco businessman who traveled extensively on the road, a very, very fine man who died young at about the age of 54, 56. This is Felix Shire of San Francisco, Joan's father. Here's my mom, Florence Williams Zentner. This was taken probably about 1942 or 43 in that area. This was a picture in connection with one of the clubs that she was president of. A little blurry on Johnny the Jr. on the left there, and that's Jim in the middle, and that's Flora Shire, Flora Harris Shire, who is, of course, Joni's mom. And this was taken probably in about 1949 or 50, somewhere in that area, and Flora passed away in about 1953. Lovely woman, very kind, sweet, a wonderful personality, never seemed to be mad at anybody about anything. On the left, of course, there's Flora Harris Shire, and on the right is Mrs. Sam Zentner, Florence Williams Zentner. They're walking down the street in San Francisco, and they both look very happy. They've probably been shopping. It was done in about 1950, I would say. Ellen Kramer Williams, who is my mother, Florence Zentner's mother. She is my grandmother, and this picture was taken a long time ago. She raised 3 daughters and 3 sons. Her husband, my grandfather, was a sea captain on the Great Lakes and was gone a great deal of the time. A lot of credit goes to Ellen Kramer Williams, my grandmother. The picture was taken either in the fall of 22 or the spring of 1923. It's the second location that my father had in the Chevrolet business, and you can see the old-fashioned sign, S.W. Zentner Proprietor. This was on the 400 block of Main Street. That would be West 17th Street. His first store, his first garage, was over in the 500 block of 17th Street. And then in late 1923, early 1924, he moved to the location which is across the street from the branding iron. Well, the branding iron wasn't there. He was there before the branding iron. These are 4 of his most trusted guys, and that about was his whole crew at that time. He expanded a lot later. He's in the center, Sam Zentner. Okay, here's a picture. The guy on the left is Joe Wolf, who was a cousin of Jones. He lived in L.A. This was taken at, I believe, a nightclub called the Tropics in Los Angeles in about 1945. Of course, that's Joe Wolf's girlfriend, a girl that I think he married. He was quite a football player for USC later on. A nice kid. Of course, the guy way on the right, that pencil neck looking guy, is yours truly. And that cute little chick with the dark hair is Grandma Joan. And that was about 1945. My mom again, and one of her favorite big hats. She loved big hats. She loved those big flowers in the front and coats that looked like that. That's a typical picture of Mom posing down there in our old neighborhood on West 22nd Street. Pictures of Joan and I. This was taken in about 1943, I would say. I don't know whether it's one of her favorite pictures, but I really enjoy it and look at it all the time. And that's what it says in the book. This is John's favorite picture of Joan and John together. 1943. This is the ranch, the Zentner Ranch in Wisconsin Dells, back in Wisconsin. And this is where my dad was raised. And a very successful farmer was Ralph Zentner. This is the oldest picture, I think, of a Zentner establishment that we have. Wisconsin Dells, the Zentner Farms. Okay, here's an old picture that was taken on the West Coast. The only one missing of the Zentner clan here is Uncle John, and that's because he was back on the farm in Wisconsin Dells. But on the upper left is Frank, or Francis Zentner, who is the father of Bun Zentner, and he's the guy that worked for Roth Chevrolet for many years, whose place I took down there. On the upper right is my father, Sam Zentner. On the lower left is Will Zentner, who stayed in Minnesota, and on the bottom right is Albert Zentner, who lived in Portland, Oregon. All of them were successful businessmen, the Zentner brothers. Picture of me, and you can see the reproduction isn't as good as it should be. Now, from this picture, I was offered a lot of movie parts, major parts, and probably if I had accepted them, Cary Grant and Henry Fonda and those guys would have been selling cars. But I preferred my athletic career, inventing games, and selling used cars. Do you think I could have been in the movies? I lie a lot. They never did offer me a thing, and it just makes me sick to think that such a beautiful face like that would wind up selling used cars. That's all. That's all. Okay, Lauren is going to tell you who they are because he's got the reading in front of him. Go ahead, Lauren.
Okay, from left to right is Flora. That's
Joni's mother, Flora Shire.
Okay. And Eliza, in parentheses, they've got written here Lizzie, Augusta, which are Gussie Stebbins' dad, is that right?
Right.
Okay, wait a minute, that's not true. It's a top row was Flora, Eliza, and Augusta. Then the two on the bottom row here is Rose and Cecilia, and they have another sister that's not born yet whose name was Rebecca.
Rebecca. Okay, that is the Harris girls, one of which is Grandma Flora Shire. Okay, Ellen, who had an unfortunate health situation and passed away at the age of 37. She was, that would be in 1960. She passed away the same year as my mother. She was 37. She was 3 years younger than I. She had 3 children. She had Richard, who passed away several years ago in a very unfortunate industrial accident. She had Robert, who is a scientist, holds a doctor's degree in biochemistry, and a daughter, Lenny, who lives in Salinas and is very happy. Her husband, Henry, remarried. Ellen was a very fine lady who just had an unlucky life. Taken when I was probably 15, my brother would be about 6, and my sister maybe 12 or 13, in that area. Of course, that's my mother on the left. My dad isn't in this picture. We have several pictures where she just took the 3 of us. She was a fine mother. She gave us everything, maybe too much. I think my best description of Flora Harris Shire, who is Joni's mother, is a grand, understanding lady. I think of all of the ladies that I've run into in this world, nobody had a better personality. Nobody was more understanding. My mother was great too. But I think that if everybody in this family for the next 500 years inherited her personality, this family would be well off for it. A grand lady, Flora Harris Shire, Joni's mother. Your grandmother, your great-great-grandmother, whatever. Well, here's Joni, and I think this would have to be my favorite picture. I know it's Judy's favorite picture and Jim and John's. I think even more so than the picture of 2 of us together. Joni really had some good looks there, and of course that's what attracted a very beautiful husband. I mean, I don't mean that, but something like that. She was a beautiful gal, and really a pretty decent personality too when she was young, and she still got a pretty good personality. Not too bad, not too bad. Jim on the left, and that's John in the center, and that's Judy in the right. And I don't think Jackie was born at this time. This is a very cute little picture of 3 darling little kids. Okay, here's a picture made after Jackie was born. Of course, that's Johnny on the right, Jim in the center, Judy in the right, and the lower is Jackie. 3 cute little kids.
What, 4 cute little kids?
Make that 4 cute little kids. Working our way up in ages, and there's Jackie and Judy and Johnny and Jimmy. 4 cute little kids. This went out to be about Christmas of 1952. As you can see, Jackie was just a baby. She's being held in the center there by John Jr. with Jim on the left, and a little bitty Judy on the right, and of course a considerably younger Daddy and Mommy there. That's about Christmas of 1952. Cute little family, except for that guy on the right. This picture isn't in very good shape, but it's a oldest picture that I have with Joni, and she was really a cute little kid, and hey, I save it in a special little thing. This is Joni when she was just a little bitty kid and an awful cute little girl. My 2 pictures will be teenage pictures, and this is John Jr. about 16 or 17 when he was playing football at Merced High School. At the same age, and when he was in Merced High School, either 16 or 17, playing football and baseball and basketball for Merced High School. At Merced High School. A little earlier, she had been the county diving champion, and who knows how far she could have gone at that time. Here's Judy in Merced High, probably 16 or 17 years of age. Here is Jackie on the left, of course, and Ray Chant on the right. Jackie was one of the outstanding people in drama ever at Merced High, and she loved it. On the right, of course, Ray Chant lived with us and is kind of like a member of the family. They were very good friends, and we see Ray all the time and wish him the best of luck, and he'll always be like a member of the family. Tried to touch all the bases, as we say. We are very proud. When I say we, the whole family is very proud of the whole family. We're not being cocky or anything like that about it, but so many of our people have tried hard, they've gone to school, they've done the very, very best they can. And at this particular point in time, all I can say is that I'm very happy about what's happened in the past, what's happening now, with our whole family. There's a good bunch of kids, and I believe that maybe if you look at this down through the years, possibly, just possibly, it'll be some sort of an inspiration for those of you that are not yet born in the year 1989. So with that, I'll wrap it up. Good luck. We love you. And wherever we are, 50, 20, 100, 200, 500 years from now, you could be looking at this. We, in some way, are going to know about you, and we're going to think about you. Thanks. God love you. God love you. God love you.